So I get the distinct impression that most people, when they walk into a museum or a gallery, see it as a really quiet space. Like libraries, we just have shelves and walls filled with objects that just can't be disturbed. And when you go into the exhibition, you're just supposed to sit and silently stare and contemplate the artwork in front of you. Quick question, how many people have ever been to an art museum? Great. And when you look at a work of art, how long would you say you generally look at it? 1 minute? 2 minutes? 5 minutes? Well, according to several studies done by the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the average viewer looks between 15 and 32 seconds. And that's including looking at the work of art, reading the label, glancing back, and then moving on. I don't know about you, but I've stared at the box of a bag of cereal for longer. So the artwork goes on to be seemingly silent. As a museum professional and art lover, I find all the artwork I encounter to be extremely engaging. And when in the elementary school library, I came across this laminated poster on the end cap of a shelf. It was by Marc Chagall. And I remember staring at it for what seemed hours. And it grabbed me. And later I traveled to New York to see the work in person. And I traveled to France just to learn more. And only later would I learn the historical context behind this green-faced man and goat and everything seeming so soft and floating. Chagall was a Russian, French, Jewish artist. And he was toying with and harking back to folk art traditions and mixing them with modernist leanings of the avant-garde. Chagall was part of several artist groups and movements in Paris. You know, all those isms that we learn in art history class. But what's really important here is that this work of art got me to travel across the globe. And this came from an artist who wasn't afraid to create something completely unique and something that can still be identified from across a room today. But most people don't view Chagall as a rebel. They don't think of him having to travel between two countries due to war and his religion, or the fact that he was deemed a degenerate artist by the Nazi Party. I find the cultural context behind this piece just as engaging as the work of art itself. But let's dive in and talk about some of these artists and radical works that I'm talking about. Take, for example, the current exhibition on view at the Denison Museum, A Time Most Uncivil, Harper's Pictorial History of the Civil War by Kara Walker. Once again, people walk in, they do a loop, and they leave. But these prints, these large prints, if they could talk, they would scream off the wall with dialogue. This is powerful art. It's historic, it's tense, and it's violent. These faceless shadows overlay and interact with the original prints in a way that calls to question what's missing. Slavery, which was the central focus behind the Civil War. And when we dig deeper, we find that the original prints date back to 1866. And the authors, Guernsey and Alden, assert, "We propose at the outset to narrate events just as they occurred, to praise no man unduly because he strove for the right, and to malign no man because he strove for the wrong." This was supposed to be this holistic and unbiased account of the Civil War, but that's simply not what we encounter when we walk in the gallery. These violent and racially charged silhouettes create this tense struggle, and it creates this dual narrative that we, the viewer, have to work through of fact and fiction. And it creates a platform for discussion about slavery, sexuality, race, violence, and American culture. But Kara Walker and contemporary artists are hardly the first rebels of the art world. So let's go back in time. You know, to those lily-filled ponds of Giverny, the dancers, the gardens, the impressionists. Most of us can find something familiar in a work of art like this. It seems idyllic today, but historically, these artists were rebels of their day, and this artwork was not well received. So let's set the stage. Paris, April 1874, an exhibition opens. A critic would liken these works to something hatched inside an insane asylum, and a cartoonist would urge pregnant women not to view the shocking works of art. These artists knew they'd create a scandal. After all, they were going up the entire establishment of the Paris Salon, this juried system that celebrated traditional paintings of religious and Greek allegories, landscapes, and still lives. These artists were trying to capture modern day using broad gestural brushstrokes and an unusually bold color palette. Originally, they called themselves the Anonymous Society of Artists, Painters, Printmakers, Sculptors, yada yada, you get the idea. Only later would they be called the Impressionists, and that's because a critic lifted the name from a painting by Claude Monet. But can you imagine breaking free of a social system? Forget the school, forget the degree, I'm just going to do my own thing. This simply had not been done before. You had to be seen in the Paris Salon. It was the gallery. And only if you were accepted, which I guarantee these artists would not have been, because you possibly make a name for yourself in the art world. Again and again, this happens in the history of the arts. Artists break free of form and style. They reinterpret the world around them and help us see the world around us in a new light. But let's move forward into the 20th century. We see these pretty incised lines, two female figures on top of a horse, and even today we can kind of recognize that it's a circus performer. But once again, when we dig deeper, we find out that Picasso is hanging out with society's outsiders, the circus families. And now he's literally going to the asylums to paint the people within their walls. Matisse, on the right, is capturing something that artists have for centuries, the female form, with just a few lines. We're able to overlay in our minds the face and the beauty that this print's supposed to represent. On the left, Joan Moreau shows us shapes we can all recognize. The square, the line, the circle. It seems so happy and playful. These artists were part of the rising cityscapes and street scenes of the industrial era. They're breaking free from realism. And throughout the 20th century, they'd be pushing the limit of what's even considered art. So let's move forward. And as we do, things get a little crazy. So we're breaking free of the canvas entirely. And I've never had much cause to stare at a urinal, but hey, it's in the museum and it's signed, right? Well, Duchamp is calling into question appropriation and intent. Is it art if I put my name on it? If I say it's art? Artists don't live in a vacuum. The musicians, dancers, painters, they've all been paralleling their concepts. But it wasn't until the 1960s that we get artists like John Cage and even Robert Indiana coming together and collaborating, where we have spoken word and performances and visual art. Graphic designers capture our attentions in every shopping mall, but what happens when you bring them into the gallery? Andy Warhol brought us soup cans and Brillo boxes and made us think about all the mass-produced artwork around us. Stepping outside the gallery, we can be awed by Mother Nature's beauty. And in this constructed environment, light is only allowed in through a central opening in the ceiling, and it causes us to pause and look up at the sky that's now framed above us. James Turrell, he makes us step outside the museum walls and look at the landscape in the landscape as part of the earth art movement. And now we're beginning to distill art down to its most basic form, the idea, the medium, and the intent. Today we have graffiti artists. Perhaps you've seen this iconic image of Obey, a popular series by Shepard Fairey. Is it vandalism? Is it art? Is it mine? Banksy takes a violent scene from a riot and replaces a Molotov cocktail with a bouquet of flowers. Artists are stepping outside the gallery, and now they're appropriating public places. Just like the Impressionists were trying to break free of the salon and the academy, street artists are pushing past formal critical acceptance and speaking directly to the public. Some of the most successful works of art creatively destroy social taboos, political injustice, and even the very medium they're made of. Brazilian artist Vic Muniz toys with the idea of aesthetic beauty. This work of art is literally made of garbage. It makes us think about, what is art? What is beauty? Is it appropriate to take a historic image and make it out of garbage? Or does it make us think about what we value in our society and what is trash? Ai Weiwei sunflower seeds at first glance looks like a meditative scene. But when we zoom in, we realize that each seed has been painstakingly cast out of porcelain and individually hand-painted. Zooming out, we can think about China's rich history in the production of China and the broader cultural construct and direct parallel to the Cultural Revolution, because Chairman Mao was thought of as the sun and his light shining down on the people, the seeds. These acts are considered so subversive by his own government, he's been subject to being kidnapped and interrogated. He's risking his freedom and livelihood for what he thinks is a fundamental truth that should be seen and discussed. Now, it's okay to like something or not like something. Much like when we meet people for the first time, not every piece of art you encounter is going to leave you transformed or changed. It's also okay to like something just because you like it. But art is more than just liking or not liking something. So I challenge you to visit the Denison Museum or any museum and have a dialogue with a work of art. To look for more than 30 seconds. Look deeply. And although the art is fascinating, the artist, the context, and the history can add to that story. The real power of art is in its ability to convey ideas and question assumptions. And when we acknowledge that art is powerful, we realize that it can inspire change just as much as force or politics. And every day, we make that choice to make that change. So the next time you are ever given the opportunity between a choice between a grenade or paint, choose the paint.